Good evening, everyone. This is Keith Much with Roy E. Bork, the author of the book called "The Merging of Two Worlds." How you doing, Roy?
I am good tonight.
And what do you have for us tonight?
I want to talk about the Son of God.
Okay. And what do you have? What do you have with that subject? Of course, this is from your book, right?
It is. We know of the Son of God in four Gospels. Approximately a little over 2,000 years ago, a man was born into the world. And the story is written in four Gospels. And it's been a very controversial subject. Some people regard Jesus as the truly true Son of God, and other people see him as someone who died a terrible death. And so I want to discuss who was this Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus came into the world when the world was playing king of the hill in a very vicious cycle. The Romans were oppressing the Jews and the peoples around them and trying to create an empire. They had incorporated crucifixion as one of their means of execution. It was a very cruel and painful way to die. And Jesus comes into the world, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, as a lowly person, born in a manger. Most kings in that day would have been born in a palace. And so what made Jesus different? For 30 years, he prepared himself for his work. And then about 30 years of old, he went to see John the Baptist. John the Baptist recognized him right off as, "I should be baptized by you." Baptism was a rite of passage. Jesus was preparing himself for the work that he had to do. And so he was baptized by John and then immediately went off into the wilderness to be tempted. And this is an interesting story because most people think that the devil is this separate character that came up to Jesus and was tempting him. But whenever we're tempted of the devil, it is the powers within that tempt us. Jesus was hungry. It says he had been in the woods or the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. Of course, back then, that may have been a symbolic gesture, not necessarily it was actually that time. And the tempter said, "If you be the Son of God, and command these stones to be made bread." And Jesus said, "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth from the mouth of God." Now, what did he mean by that? Bread is food for the body, but the Word of God is food for the soul. Without the proper ideas, we just exist. So Jesus knew you had to understand your roots. You had to understand where you came from if it was really going to matter. And then the second temptation. I have to find that.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Just please stand by.
By the way, this is not like we're not preaching. We're enlightening about facts of the Bible and misconceptions and stuff like that. So this is not like a Sunday United FM Sunday service.
It's more of an education center.
Educational type of conversation.
The thing is, I used to talk about this to different people, and they
Right.
had different concepts.
Roy, are you referring to the world and the flesh?
Am I what?
Are you referring to the three sources of temptation? Christian theology, the world, the flesh, and the devil.
Right now, he's trying to look through his book.
Jesus had three temptations when he was in the wilderness. Yeah, okay. The second temptation was false security. Thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge concerning thee. Well, Jesus knew those who take careless risks because they think that God is looking out for them are quickly disillusioned. You stand close to the edge of a cliff and you slip and fall. Gravity and inertia are not going to change. So if you have no sense of caution, there are people who do careless things. I remember I was at the airport the other day, and this guy goes by on a motorcycle doing a wheelie. And one of our Civil Air Patrol members says to me, "Job security." And I said, "What do you do?" And he says, I'm a EMT. I scrape these guys up off the floor when they wipe out. It's just the idea that,
Hi, Karen. Karen Paul's watching.
okay. And the third temptation was the lust of worldly gain. All of these kingdoms will I give thee if thou wilt fall down and worship me. Well, Jesus knew the power that he had. He knew that he could easily have commanded the nations. Matter of fact, there was a time in which they were ready to give him the kingdom. But he walked away from it because that's not what he was about. It wasn't about a worldly kingdom. He was about enlightenment. He was about bringing people to the knowledge of God. And so he rebuked Satan and he headed back out to do his mission. And he selected 12 apostles. And of those 12, he began his mission. Now, there's a lot of stories. I was talking to an individual about the Gospels, and he says, well, if you try to put all four together, it makes Jesus out to be a schizophrenic. And actually, he's right. Because the first three Gospels, Jesus is very reserved of who he is. And then the last Gospel, which is John, he declares it openly. But we have to remember that all four Gospels were written by four different people, from a different perspective. Matthew was a fisherman. Actually, that might not be right. Don't quote me on that. You had Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Luke was a doctor. Supposedly Luke was with Paul. And so the book of Luke was written by an individual that probably never met Jesus. John was the last to write, and he was an aristocrat. And so John writes it from a perspective of someone who is Mr. Big Shot, high and mighty. I lost one of my ears. Anyways, we'll catch it later.
Just reach up and wiggle the thing. Did you get it back?
I don't know.
Yep.
Nope.
No?
No. I still got one.
Oh, we'll have to check it after.
All right, one is out. Anyways, but the thing is these Gospels were written at different times. Supposedly Mark was the first written. Mark is the most basic of the four rather. Then Matthew came around, and Matthew is a little more involved. Then Luke, being a doctor, he really puts a lot of emphasis on making it almost a theatrical event. And then John is, like I say, an aristocrat, and Jesus declares all over. Is there a call coming in?
No.
Okay.
No, just my battery telling me it's charged.
All right. So, anyways, Jesus walked among the people. He wasn't Mr. Big Shot. He was a breath of fresh air. He was speaking as a man of authority, and yet at the same token, he was the average man's best friend. He actually condemned the leaders of the time. He called them a generation of vipers, whited sepulchres, sepulchre being a tomb, white on the outside and beautiful, and inside full of dead men's bones. It's about as low as you can bring somebody. And it was because of what Jesus represented. The people who were in charge wanted to be in the high places. Jesus says that's not where it's at. You got to live your life as an average person. Do the best you can. Give to the world. It's not what you demand of others, it's what you demand of yourself. But there were many controversies about whether the Gospels were true or not or what. But I want to go through a few of the things that went on. So one of the things was his healing. And I want to talk about healing. Because a lot of times you'll find that most people's problems are actually spiritual, which means that they're in their minds. I'm going to digress a little bit here and talk a little bit about the Church of Scientology. Because I had studied in the Church of Scientology for a little while. I read the book, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health. I don't have a problem with the theory, I have a problem with the application. So I'm not going to advocate the Church of Scientology to anyone. I'm just going to try to present to you some of the information as to what they knew, how they knew it. They started off with hypnotism. They had several individuals that put aside, and then they put one under a hypnotic spell. And all the time they're talking to the congregation. And then they took the man out of the hypnotic spell, and now he's one of the group, and they're having a discussion, and after a while the man who was hypnotized, he takes his coat off. And after a short time he puts his coat back on. And in the meantime they were talking about what causes people to act the way they do. And one of the things they were talking about was called engrams. Now, engram is what the church may have referred to as demons, some disturbance in the mental field. And this guy that was hypnotized, he takes his coat off again, and after a few minutes he puts it back on, and they asked him, what's with the coat? And it was warm, but maybe it wasn't as warm as he thought, and put it back on. And so they're talking, and they said, what happens when an individual is can a person be hypnotized without them knowing it? And the individual hypnotized takes his coat off again, and they said, what's with the coat? Well, I just wanted to see who made it. So he looks at the tag inside, and then he puts his coat back on. And this was a thing going back and forth. He kept taking his coat off, putting it back on, and they're saying, well, what's with the coat? And he kept coming up with these excuses, but after a while he started running out of excuses. So they said when an individual is unconscious, the body's senses are still working, but conscious awareness is not. So in an unconscious state, your mind is still active, but you're not consciously aware of what's going on. And so there are things that may happen during that period of unconsciousness that your mind is storing that information, but you don't remember it. And so finally they looked at the individual who was hypnotized, and he's still with his coat on and off, and he doesn't know why. And they said, well, we'll tell you why. while you were in a hypnotic trance, we told you that every time the commentator clutched his tie, you would take off your coat, and when he let it go, you would put it back on. And the guy was doing it like clockwork, no idea why he was doing it. And when they finally brought it to his attention, he says, "Yeah, that's right. You did." And this is what the basis of some of these demons are all about, is that things happen in the mind that you don't remember, things from your childhood, and now you're having these sensations. You don't know why you're acting the way you are. You don't know why you think the way you do, but you're just reacting to things. And it has to do with these so-called engrams. And in the ancient world, they would have been called demons. And these are the demons that Jesus knew where they came from and how to deal with them. So when it says that Jesus was healing people, we really have a hard time to understand that in today's world. I am going to give you 2 case histories. There was a man who was blowing blind. He went to an optometrist to try to find the answer, and the optometrist examined his eyes, and they said there's no physical cause for why he should be losing his eyesight. He recommended that the man go to a hypnotherapist to look for a cause. The therapist, finding no immediate cause of the problem, placed the man into a hypnotic trance. And what the therapist discovered is that the patient had an obsession with pornography and believed that it would lead him to hell. So it was part of his religious belief. He had prayed that God would take away his obsession for pornography, for he feared the outcome, yet he lacked the willpower to stop on his own. His mind, attempting to comply, was subconsciously interfering with his ability to see. His mind was literally shutting off his eyesight. The therapist got him involved in sex addiction therapy, and subsequently his eyesight returned to normal. Now, this is a hard concept to grasp, that the mind could do that to a person, but it can. Another case history. A man was losing the use of his right arm. His doctor could find no physical reason for the malady and also referred him to a hypnotherapist. Again, hypnosis was involved. The therapist discovered that the patient had observed his wife leave with his neighbor to some unknown location. Believing that his neighbor was having an affair with his wife, he wanted to start a fight with the man. But his man was also his best friend, so it created a quandary. The psychological conflict was causing his arm to lose mobility. The doctor advised the patient to confront his wife with his concern in order to resolve the problem. Well, it turns out the patient discovered his wife wanted to surprise him with a new suit, and being that the neighbor was of the same height and build, was using him as a model to tailor the suit to fit. Upon discovering this, the patient's arm soon returned to normal use. Now, it's amazing how the mind can affect us in that manner. So, according to the Church of Scientology, when we are in an abusive situation and we are being children of abuse, usually are the ones that are most susceptible to it, you end up going into a state of withdrawal. And during that time, that's when the mind can pick up these so-called engrams, they call them. Now, in Jesus' day, what was going on in the world was terrible. I've never witnessed a crucifixion. I don't ever want to. I watched Mel Gibson's movie. I won't offer it to anyone because to me it didn't really describe why it happened, didn't describe the resurrection that followed, didn't describe anything other than the fact that it talked about the brutality of it. But we've never seen it. We don't know how it affects a person's psychology. There was a man, Jesus went to heal him. He was sick of the palsy, which is like a paralysis. It's very possible that the individual was not physically ill, but mentally ill. If you believe that your actions are going to lead you into an eternal torment, and that was the talk at the time, it has can have a terrible disposition on your physical and emotional well-being. It's very possible that there was nothing physically wrong with the man, but he was afraid to do anything. And as a result, his muscles were all locked up with fear. And the interesting thing in the Gospels is that the very first words that Jesus said to him is, "Son, thy sins be forgiven thee." Now these words coming from a man that was believed to be the Messiah could have had a very powerful effect. And this guy's muscles, all locked up with fear, suddenly are starting to release. And all of a sudden the man was no longer sick of the palsy. He picks up his stretcher and he walks away. You do not know how the mind affects things, but the thing is, I believe Jesus did know. And that's why he was able to heal the way he did. He saw through the soul to a person. He didn't just see the outward man. He saw the inward man. He knew why things were the way they were. But he opposed authority. And all through history you find that when people oppose authority, they immediately take offense and, well, you can't have this guy around anymore. So the world decided they were going to get rid of him. And they conspired against him, and they ended up having him crucified. What people don't realize is that Jesus knew what was going to happen to him. Jesus also knew that the death of him wasn't going to be the end of him. He knew the effect that his death would have on future generations. What Jesus did took more courage than any of us would ever have. But he endured. And now the movement covers the world. Christianity has become a worldwide religion. It's changing people's lives. But that's only if you believe in him. And believing in him doesn't mean just saying, I believe in Jesus. Jesus said, if you love me, or how can you say you love me and you don't do the things that I say? And I'll tell you that if you don't follow the teachings of Jesus, that is a declaration that you don't really believe him. Because if you did believe in him, you would do the things that he said. Love your neighbor. Do good to others. I had read it in a mystical book. It talks about occult teachings. And it's actually a verse in the Quran as well. It says, when you do good to others, you don't have any enemies. People only have enemies because they see others as a threat to their existence. And so the teachings of Jesus about love your enemy doesn't mean that you don't defend yourself. But what it means is that you don't express hate to other people. Hate is not the absence or the opposite of love. Hate is an expression of fear. I actually talk to people who, and we're going to talk about this protest stuff. I've actually talked to people who said that they oppressed the black man only for one reason, because they were afraid if the black man were to rise up in power, that the black man would do to the whites what they did to them. And so they feared what would happen. And that's a terrible reason for mistreating people, but out of fear, people do stuff like that. They're actually afraid of retaliation. Now, most black people say we would never do that. And yet I've talked to people who are afraid that they would. And so they say we want to keep them down. It's an expression of fear. So when I talk about, healing, we're talking about disturbances in the mental field. Hate is an expression of fear. And disturbances in the mental field cause all kinds of disturbances. According to the Church of Scientology, just about every psychological problem has its roots in a disturbance in the mental field. People with schizophrenia, with bipolar disorder have been healed simply because they were able to get to the cause of the problem. Now, one of the problems that I see in Church of Scientology isn't its theory, it's in its methods. They use a method which is known as auditing. In auditing, it's like a lie detector. They get you to reveal things about yourself because they're trying to get to the root cause of the problem. But what ends up happening is that now they know things about you. There's been case histories of blackmail and intimidation, trying to get you to promote their theories to other people. There was a case history, and I read it in Reader's Digest, that these senators had been involved in the Church of Scientology. And they said it was actually helping them. And then the Church of Scientology said, well, you need to get other people involved in this and maybe even, do some legislation. And they said, well, we can't legislate religion. Church of Scientology is essentially a form of religion. And we can't force this on people. We can only present it as, it may be able to be helpful. They said, well, wait a minute. We know things about you that you wouldn't want the world to know. And they realized that what they revealed to them, well, you have patient doctor confidentiality. And where was that with these people? It was being violated. And so these individuals finally had to come clean with the world about what they had exposed to the Church of Scientology. And I'm not saying that happens all the time, but I'm just saying that watch out for it, because it's happened quite a bit. I don't have a problem with the theory, but I do have a problem with the application. But I'm using the theory because it has a lot to say at how Jesus was able to do what he did. He knew the inner man. He knew what was going on within the mind. And he was able to help these people, and he can still help people today. When people give their life to Christ, it changes them because he sees inside their hearts. And he's able to bring these things out in the open. Got to figure out where I'm going with this.
We're coming up on the half hour.
We're coming up on the half hour. I've been a Christian all of my life, and I believe that if you don't follow the teachings of Jesus, doesn't matter whether you say you believe in him or not, you really don't. Because I go back to what I said earlier, if you don't follow the teachings of Jesus, that is a declaration that you don't believe in him. Because if you did believe in him, why would you not do what he says? So I help people. During these protest movements, I have seen a lot of humanitarian aid to others. I mean, this is the true Christian, whether they claim themselves to be Christian or not. It's not about what you claim to believe, but how you live your life. Because in the day of judgment, it isn't going to be what you believed. It's going to be how you treated your fellow man. In the parable of the separation of the sheep from the goats, it had nothing to do with what they believed. He said, when I was in trouble, you helped me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. And they said, when, Lord, did we see you these? And he says, just as you've done to the least of these, you've done it to me. And he turned to the goats and he said the same thing. He said, when I was in need, you ignored me. You didn't give me drink. You didn't give me food. You didn't give me shelter. And they said, when, Lord, did we see you this way? And he says, just as you didn't do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. So it has to do with how you treat your fellow man. It has nothing to do with what you believe. It has nothing to do with what religion you belong to. And that's the thing about Christ. Christ is not a person. It's a consciousness. Jesus represented it. But he was one man. He cared about the world. He gave his life for the world. And it moved, it followed into a movement, and that movement is bringing people back to life, giving them a new lease on life. I've met people that had drug addictions, sex addictions, alcohol addictions. They gave their life over to Jesus and they suddenly found a new lease on life. But it's the awakening. And that's one of the problems. People don't understand the awakening. It's not about, oh, I believe. It's about what happens to you when your mind opens to that new channel. What Jesus talked about, the Holy Spirit. I was raised a Catholic, and they said, well, you get the Holy Spirit when you're confirmed. And it's like, well, that's not what Jesus said. The Holy Spirit, I'll send the Holy Spirit, and He'll teach you all things. And when I was 9 years old, I had an experience. Actually, I'll tell you about how it came about. I was questioning the Sunday school teachers, and I was asking them questions that they couldn't answer, so they sent me to Mother Superior. And Mother Superior said, you need to get alone with God and ask Him those questions and let Him answer. And a couple of weeks later, I was in meditation. And I asked God to reveal Himself to me. And I had an experience. I had an awakening. And I knew at the age of 9 that everything in nature was reducible to a common denominator. But I didn't know what it was. And I went back to my Sunday school teachers and I told them what I experienced. And they said, oh no, the devil's putting ideas in your head. And they said that because I was questioning their concept of God. And I went to my secular school teachers and I said the same thing. And they said, well, you'd better talk to your parents about seeing a shrink. Sounds like you're having some kind of mental breakdown. They didn't understand what had happened to me. Only a person trained in Eastern philosophy would know that I had awakened to a transcendent experience. And it was 11 years later when I was in the nuclear physics class that they explained the common denominator. It had to do with nuclear physics. Every electron in the universe is the same. Every proton is the same. Every neutron is the same. And these three particles make up everything else. And as soon as he said that, the experience I had 11 years later suddenly came to life. And since that day, it has guided my life. Everything I know, everything I do is based on that awakening. But those are the awakenings that free people from the chains that bind them. When it talks about Jesus will set you free from what? Set you free from these mental chains that hold you into these, well, you got to belong to this religion, or you got to do these things, or you got to do that. It's not about what you do. It's not about what you believe. It's about how you live your life. I looked at science, and I said, science is doing everything Jesus said we do. So how can the church say, well, science is opposed to the church? It's like they are accomplishing the miracles. You want to see miracles? Go to the hospital. They're bringing people back to life. They're doing what Jesus told them they would be able to do, and is the scientific community that's doing it. There's a problem when the church rebuke science. Science was one of the two branches of theology, and I discovered that. It comes from an old definition that dates back to 1905. The modern definition doesn't include science, but the old definition does. It is knowledge of God by His works, by the way of nature and reason, and that is the scientific method. We study the cosmos for its laws, and as we understand those laws, we know why things happen. And when we know why things happen, then we can change things. We can make things happen. They just put 2 astronauts up on the International Space Station. They didn't know how the laws of the cosmos worked. It never would have happened. But this is what men and women can do when they understand how the cosmos works. And one of the things about the merging of two worlds, it's about bringing science and religion together. The awakening that I had helped me to understand this Messiah, the Holy Spirit, what He knew. I've been trying to understand that more and more. And the more I learn about it, the deeper I go into how He was able to do the things that He did. And the fact that the world killed Him, that there are a lot of people today that believe in God. They believe in Jesus, and they're changing their lives. When I see all this humanitarian aid, these are the people that are doing. Again, I go back, it's not what you believe, it's what you do. When you help other people succeed, you are fulfilling. You are showing that you believe in what this man taught, because that is his teaching. Love thy neighbor as thyself. So when you help other people, and you do it unselfishly, then you are believing in this man. So I say, help other people when you can. There was a story. It was about John D. Rockefeller Sr. He was in his early 50s. Could barely eat. He was nearly on his deathbed. The doctors didn't give him another year. He had become the first self-made billionaire. He had neither good health or happiness to go with it. Couldn't figure it out. This guy has all the money in the world. Why should he not be happy? He wasn't happy because nobody loved him. And they didn't love him because he was selfish. And one night he had a revelation. And he realized if he died, he couldn't take a single dime with him. And that night he changed his life. And that's when he started the Rockefeller Center. And he started pouring money into education and into medicine and into charities. And everything changed. All of a sudden, people loved this man. And the love that reflected back at him just invigorated him. He started eating right. He started sleeping right. People greeted him. All of a sudden, his whole life changed because he changed to the world. He died a happy man in 98. That's what letting go of selfishness can do for you. Changed his whole life. And now he's heralded as a great man of the past. What he left the world, it opened so many doors for so many people just because he said, I'm not going to hoard it anymore. And he gave it back. And in the process of giving back, he got his life back. And that's what Jesus is all about. Love your fellow man. Help other people when you can. I just want to mention one thing about these protests. What happened to George Floyd is inexcusable. But the looting and the riots and the fires, the arson, the destruction, that's inexcusable as well. In these protests, the one thing I haven't heard is, what can the black man do to change his image? I see the same problems now that I saw when I was in the service 40 years ago. They came to me with these anti-discrimination classes. And they said, well, black people see things differently than we do. I said, okay. They use different language. Yeah, but some of their language is foul. Well, that to them, they don't see that as swears. So I says, so what are you saying? That when they're in our presence, we're supposed to lower our standards? And they, well, no, that's not what we're asking. Well, what are you asking? And they say, well, you just got to try to understand them. He says, well, trying to understand them is one thing, but if they're going to continue that way, we find it offensive when people talk swears, when they talk.
The N-word.
They use the N-word.
They call each other the N-word.
They call each other the N-word.
I just don't know. I'll never understand that.
Anyways, and then they said, well, you know, the way they dress. If I came home dressed the way some of these people do, my father would have pulled my pants down the rest of the way and gave me a thrashing. And then he would have told me, you take those clothes off or I rip them off. And it isn't because he was mean, it's because he knew the kind of reputation that it would give me. And so I say, I'm glad that they're bringing these police to justice, because what they did is inexcusable. That man should not have died for what he did. But at the same token, healing can't happen if it's only one-sided. I mean, they say Black Lives Matter, and I say all lives matter. What about white lives? Do they not matter? Lady lived on the street next to me, Casey Chadwick. She had a black boyfriend who was a crack dealer, and this Latino came into the picture. And before long, she was full of knife wounds and stuffed into a closet. Do white lives matter?
No.
Yes, they do.
Well, according to everyone else, they don't right now.
Well, I'm saying it has to be part of the dialogue. It can't be one-sided. I am not a racist. I am the vice president of Black Pilots of America, Connecticut chapter, because I care about them. I hired a black man to work with me because I care about them. There's a group called Emerson Theater Collaborative. I'm a lighting designer for community theater. I do a lot of work for them. Most of their cast are black because I care about them. But these people, they are respectable. And I say that, you know, when a person drives around a car and he's got a rich car and he doesn't have a job, the police, they say, well, why are you profiling us? Because they're wondering, where's the money coming from? They know it's coming from somewhere, and 9 times out of 10, it's some illegal activity going on. So the dialogue has to be two-way. It can't be, well, you have to change your attitude towards us. It's like, what about you doing something to help us? Police don't profile people because they're black. They profile because there's suspicious activity going on. So I say it's a two-way street. I give the black man the benefit of the doubt. But if a person is going to walk down the street looking like a pack of coyotes with their pants half down, holding their crotch, I am not going to converse with them. And if they're going to start talking all kinds of swear words, I will walk away. And it isn't because I don't like them, it's because I don't like the behavior. So the behavior changes, everything else changes with it. It's a two-way street. You can't say you have to change your attitude toward us. What about changing it toward each other? A black family moves in, street next to me. Black man, black woman, 2 white, 2 black children. I didn't have a problem with it. We worked at the electric boat, he's at the shipyard. No problem. She works in the medical profession. They got good jobs. Got decent cars. I didn't have a problem with it. A year later, I don't see him around anymore. I figured, well, maybe he was off on assignment because he worked at electric boat. So I waited. 2 or 3 months go by, I don't see him. So I asked the wife, where's the husband? He said, oh, he left me for somebody else. And I says, Black Lives Matter? Not to him. He abandoned his own children. And then a year later, she's hanging out with a drug dealer out of New York. Black Lives Matter? Not to her. It's got to be a two-way street. I don't understand why I'm supposed to change my attitude to the black person and the black person doesn't have to change their attitude toward themselves. If black lives don't matter to the blacks, why should it matter to anybody else? And I don't say that as a reprimand. I say that as I want to help you. But you have to help me. We have to help each other. We have to work together. This is a two-way street. I'll work with you. I'll help you out. But help me by helping yourself. And I'll go back to that man Jesus. If you aren't doing what he said, you don't believe in him. It goes back to that spirit that comes within you, that awakens you, that says it brings you to a higher level of understanding. It helps you to realize, well, these things aren't good for me. You got to be open to the dialogue. What can you do to help yourself? When you go for a job interview, the guy that's doing the interviewing can't tell you why he won't hire you. He's not allowed to. There are ramifications, so he can't tell you, I won't hire you because of the way you look, I won't hire you because of the way you act. He will not tell you that. But if you go walking into a job interview and you're acting all whatever and using bad language and you're not dressed properly, you might as well tell them, don't hire me, I'm a butthead. Because your body language is saying it loud and clear. And as soon as you walk out that door, he's going to take that application and shove it in the circular file. So I'm telling you because they can't. They can't tell you why they won't hire you. But I am telling you why they won't hire some of them. Because of the way you present yourself. And that's what you need to have a dialogue with each other. How can we improve our image? And when you improve your image, other people will change the way they feel toward you. So yes, I believe that Black Lives Matter. And I'll continue to do the things that I do to help them. But I want you to help yourself. I don't want it to be a one-way street. I don't want it to be we're supposed to bend for you. It was the white man largely that fought the battle that freed them from slavery. People do care about you. But it's a two-way street. I'm aware of a lot of black people that have done tremendous things. President Barack Obama. Now there is a man that he went to the highest position that, as far as I know, it's the highest position in the world. This is what people can do when they put their minds to it. Morgan Freeman. I love watching him. Neil deGrasse Tyson. I watch his programs all the time. These are people that are highly respectable. You can do that. So that's what I'm going to say. Help yourself. It's not a one-way street. But I'm going to bring it back to the Son of God. Love your neighbor as yourself. It works both ways. When we help each other out, everybody benefits. The Merging of Two Worlds. You can find it on the internet. There's several reviews on Amazon.com. And there's a website, scienceandreligionconverging.com. It talks about the book. There's a lot of information there. It gives you other sources of information to go to.
Stephen D. White says it shouldn't matter what black people think. You should have compassion for life, period.
Well, that's true, but the same token, if somebody comes in, starts a fight with me, I'm not going to think the same way as a person that comes up to me and says, hey, can you help me out? So a lot of it reflects back. You show yourself as respectable, and I will give you that respect. But respect has to be earned. So I'm going to say, God bless and good night.